I remember the first time I heard it. Click, click. Honey, what's that? I asked my wife Carmen after waking up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. What's that? She replied in a groggy state, frustrated that I had woken her so late. But the sound had stopped. The next night I heard it again. Click, click. What could that possibly be? I wondered as I woke up my wife again. This time she heard it. It sounds like the doorknob. But by the time we walked over to it, the sound had stopped. Luckily for me, back when I lived in the city, I had always gotten into the habit of locking my bedroom door, and that tradition continued well into moving to my wife's apartment, and even our current home in the suburbs. The following night, we didn't hear the sounds. Perhaps we were both in too deep of a sleep, or maybe it didn't happen that night, but either way, we thought the strange occurrence was behind us. Until the next night, we heard it once again. Is that what I think it is? Carmen asked. It most certainly is, I replied, a chill going down my spine as the recurring sound was beginning to genuinely terrify me. This time, I tiptoed over to the door, careful not to alert whoever was turning it, and open it quickly, only to find my 8-year-old daughter just standing there staring at me. Christy? I asked. Yes, Dad, she replied. What are you doing, dear? You nearly scared me to death. I missed you and Mommy. It was so adorable that I nearly forgot how creepy the sounds of the previous nights had been. That's all? But then she simply turned and walked away. Good night, Daddy. I climbed back into bed and let out a sigh of relief that my daughter was the source of the sound. But the next day, I started to think about it more. About the number of times it happened, and how after claiming to miss us, she just simply walked away. So, when it happened again the next night, I didn't open the door. Instead, I simply tiptoed over to it and listened. Click, click. I heard my daughter tugging at the door handle, twisting and turning it in a clear attempt to pry it open while we were sleeping. Or at least, she must have assumed. That's when the whole thing began to actually terrify me. If she was trying to open the door and get into the bedroom while my wife and I were asleep, what did she intend to do? I became obsessed with that thought to the point where I couldn't fall back asleep that night and hatched a plan to get to the bottom of it. So the next night, I did what any rational parent would do when their child was uncharacteristically twisting at their bedroom doorknob every night and left the door unlocked. And so, after pretending to fall asleep, I lay in bed waiting, passing the time on my cell phone so as not to fall asleep. Until a few hours later when, in the middle of the night, I heard a new sound. Not that of the door handle twisting and turning back and forth. No, this time I simply heard the sound of the door handle turning, followed by the squeaky door opening. Click. Screech. I immediately turned off my cell phone and shut my eyes, just far enough so that I could see through them and pretended to sleep. What happened next still haunts me. Lying there in the dark, my eyes squinting, I saw the blurred shape of my daughter open the door, close it behind her, and slowly walk over to my wife's side of the bed. She must miss her mother after all. I thought to myself, giving her the benefit of the doubt, until I carefully turned my head, just slowly enough so that my daughter didn't realize I was looking, and saw my 8-year-old reach behind her and remove from her pajamas a kitchen knife. She held it up above her head and swung it down towards my sleeping wife, but not before I was able to reach my arm out and catch the blade in my hand, letting out a large scream. Ah, Christy, what are you doing? But she didn't reply. She simply let out a loud hiss and seemingly slithered her way out of our bedroom door, through the hallway and back into her bedroom, where we heard her own bedroom door slam. We left Christy in her bedroom that night before my wife drove me to the hospital as I relayed the night's events. My impaled hand more than enough evidence to convince her of what had just happened. I would like to say after we got back, my daughter returned to normal. The sound of the door handle stopped and we went back to being a family. But when we got home early that morning, Christy had broken through her bedroom door and escaped from the house, never to be seen again. Still to this day, I wonder where my daughter might be, still locking my door each night. I can only hope that others do the same. My wife and I are beside ourselves right now. This is the type of thing you see in the movies, but now it's happening to us. Yesterday evening, a little after 6, my wife and I were in the kitchen cooking dinner when my 6-year-old, almost 7 son, Kyle, walked in from the back patio. He was holding a folded piece of paper in his hand and had a strange look on his face. My son is constantly drawing and loves to read and write, so this usually wouldn't have stood out to me at all, but he just come in from hitting the baseball off the tree and really had no reason to be holding a piece of paper. My son is the type of kid who wears his emotions on his sleeve. When I asked to see the piece of paper, I could tell he really didn't want to give it to me because he flashed his typical, "I'm going to be in trouble if I do" face. I insisted, and he finally handed it over. Here's what it said. "Dear Kyle, I know this note may be scary. Your daddy will think it is, but grown-ups don't know how friendships can grow when kids are just left to be kids. And what a kid you've become, Kyle. You're growing as fast as a weed. Last night off the tee, you stroked it for 3, and your team took a 2-run lead. Yes, I've been watching. A while now, it's true. I think we would make perfect friends. You're a kid through and through, and I am one too. Even if just for pretend. The problem I fear is your parents. I doubt they would let us hang out. One is just rude, the other a prude. Church-going, pure, holy, devout. I've got an idea. Can you tell my handshaking? For me and you getting together. Tomorrow at 3, you can come and see me at the address attached to this letter. But please, pretty please, don't tell your dad. Your mom and he won't understand. Just come by yourself. I'll be dressed as an elf. And we can even hold hands. Would you like that? You will. You really will, Kyle. We will have oh my so much fun. So I will see you there, by the sycamore tree, where our 2 kindred souls become one." There was an address scribbled at the bottom of the page. 3 orange circle. I knew immediately it wasn't a prank. Carrie, my wife, is the youth group leader at our church, and Kyle did just have a t-ball game last night. And Orange Circle is only 1 street over from our street, and I'm pretty sure Lot 3 is the corner lot on the cul-de-sac, which has an empty house with a large sycamore tree in the backyard. Was this sicko really watching Kyle's game? What would have happened if I hadn't seen him with the letter? I shouted for my wife to come read it. When she did, she flipped out and ran for the phone to call the police. I flipped the note over, and on the back was some more text. I couldn't read it at first, but quickly realized it was written backwards. I'm guessing so Kyle couldn't have read it. To read it, I had to put it up in front of a mirror. And now, just in case, if your dad's reading this, it's time to tell him a story. If your mom flaps her hole, or your dad tells a soul, I'm afraid things might get rather gory. On the 10th of July, 1995, a woman named Susie went missing. Susie, you see, unlike you and me, wasn't careful about who she'd been kissing. I kept her a while, but old things get so boring. And in time, I had gotten my fill. I threw her away, and to my great dismay, the hunger I felt plagued me still. I tried to bury it deep down inside, where nothing down there can escape. But lately it seems I see Kyle in my dreams, and that hunger can no longer hide. Now that you know what I'm capable of, more than both of you can comprehend, if one word is spoken, then children get broken, and Susie will have a new friend. The police arrived in a half hour, and we showed them a note. They told us to stay inside and lock the doors for the remainder of the night. The man had obviously been in our fenced-in backyard, which made me sick to my stomach and had me cursing myself for not installing the security camera I'd gotten for Christmas. Nothing happened last night, though, thankfully. This morning, I got a call from the detective assigned to our case. He'd reviewed the list of missing persons cases from 1995, and something had turned up. Suzanne Carrington went missing July 10th, 1995, just as the note said. The last person to see her alive was a friend who saw her at the 24-hour gym they attended together. Susie had said she'd met someone new and wanted to get a quick workout in before getting ready for their second date. Susie was never seen again, and the man was never identified. And maybe the worst part was Suzanne's address, 3 Orange Circle. I'm supposed to meet with a detective later this evening. What should we do? When my friend first introduced me to the dark web, I was amazed at how such an unknown thing could have some of the most illegal things on earth. Up until today, I had only used it for learning how to code and commit small crimes, but after the horrifying videos I just found, I don't think I'll ever use the dark web again. I first met my best friend Alex a little bit after I got into high school. My parents had moved us to a new town and I had no friends. It was lonely at first, but I got used to it. We moved because they were paranoid after many murders occurred in our town. I thought this was weird, moving across the country over that, but I let it go. The reason Alex and I became friends so quickly was because we had both shared interests in the internet and everything it had to offer. I was a gaming addict and a tier 3 Pokemon subscriber, while he was more of a coder and developer. 2 years later, we were still best friends, But now, we were much older and smarter. Alex had discovered the dark web, and he was obsessed with it. He pretty much spent every hour of the day on it, searching through anything he could imagine. There was nothing wrong with this, but one search he made was the biggest mistake of his entire life. I remember waking up to dozens of text messages from him one morning. This wasn't normal. Alex wasn't a very social person, and it was very hard to get words out of him. I opened my phone to see what he'd messaged me. "Dude, Jack, you have to come over right now. This is important. Please wake up. This is urgent. Where are you?" These were only some of the messages, but the rest were very similar, with them all being urgent and saying that I need to go to his house immediately. My parents were both still at work, so I went over to Alex's house. When I arrived, there were 4 cop cars parked in front of his house, and there were dozens of people in news vans standing out front. I made my way through the crowd, and Alex's mother told the police to let me inside. I could see tears rolling down her cheeks as she opened the door. "What's going on, Miss Gonzalez?" I asked. "Alex is missing," she said as she started crying. My heart sank. How could this happen? He had just texted me earlier that morning. That was when it hit me. What if he was trying to warn me? What if his text messages were related to his disappearance? Still in shock, I walked up to one of the detectives in the kitchen. "Is Alex going to be okay?" I asked. "Of course he is. He's going to be just fine. We're going to find him very soon," one of the detectives responded. Something about that response was off. It was like I knew he was wrong. Deep down, I had this slight feeling that I wasn't going to see him ever again. I remembered the text messages, however, and pulled out my phone to show them to the detective. "He texted me this morning. What if this has something to do with him going missing?" I said swiftly. As he began reading them, his expression quickly changed. It was like it got worse. He told me that he needed to keep my phone for now to investigate the text messages and said they would give it back to me later. I stayed around the house for a while, not just because I missed Alex, but because I wanted to comfort his parents. They cared about me a lot, and it hurt to see them like that. His mother couldn't stop crying. Eventually, however, I went to Alex's room to see if I could find anything that might give a clue about why he went missing. I searched through everything, but I found nothing. But then I noticed something. Alex's computer was on, but his monitor was turned off. I looked for the button to turn it on and hit it. As the screen lit up, my heart sank. He was on the dark web. Obviously, this was normal, but for some reason, he had dozens of different tabs open. I knew this part wasn't normal, so I closed the door and locked it and began going through them. At first, it was all pretty usual for him, but then things started to get weird. He had a tab open that was an article about a murder that had happened several years ago. The article said that it was a woman who was found dead in her apartment. Her body was mutilated, cut up, and covered in acid. I nearly threw up reading it and seeing the horrifying pictures of the crime scene. Not wanting to see any of it anymore, I switched the tab just to reveal another article about another murder. Confused, I quickly went through the rest of the tabs he had open, and they were all the same thing. They all were about some type of murder or crime. The one that stuck out the most to me, however, was one about a murder that happened 2 years ago. At first, it seemed pretty normal, but as I read further, I realized what it was. It was the murder of our neighbor that prompted us to move away. Confusion quickly swept over me. How did Alex know about this? I never told him about it because, to me, it wasn't that important. I figured it must have been just a strange coincidence, but then I saw the last search he had made on his computer. It was my last name. Horrified and confused, I quickly stumbled out of his room and back to the living room. "Is everything alright?" Alex's mother said, sniffing away her tears. "Yeah, I just need to go home for dinner," I responded. On the way home, so many questions and thoughts filled my mind. Why was he searching up my last name? Did he think I had something to do with this? That must have been why he was texting me so frantically that morning. If only I could just explain to him that I didn't do anything wrong. But I couldn't. He was still missing and I had to find out why. When I got home, I raced to my room and slammed my bedroom door shut and got on my computer. I loaded up my Tor browser and turned on my VPN. I knew what I had to do. I began typing the letters of my last name, becoming more nervous after every letter. When I finally hit enter, nothing happened. It was just a blank screen. Confused, I refreshed the page, but once again, there was nothing. But why did Alex search this if there was nothing? I thought to myself, there must be something out there. I was getting ready to close the tab, thinking I had run into a dead end, when suddenly the page started to load. It took several minutes, but finally it loaded to reveal hundreds of videos. Immediately, I knew what they were. They were murders, but why did they show up when you search my last name? I considered just stopping right there and turning back, Knowing the horrifying things, I would see if I continued on, but I couldn't. I knew this had to be why Alex went missing, so I clicked on the first video. As it started playing, I saw what looked like a woman strapped to a chair in some sort of basement or something. I quickly realized who it was. It was our neighbor from 2 years ago. I could tell because she had the same heart-shaped tattoo on her neck. She sat there for a minute, struggling and panicking, and even screaming for someone to help. However, suddenly, 2 figures walked into the frame. At first, I couldn't tell who they were, but as they turned around to face the camera, my heart sank. It was my parents. My father was holding a knife, while my mother was holding a small scalpel. They paused for a moment before they started what was the most horrifying 5 minutes of my entire life. I watched as they cut her into pieces and listened as she begged for mercy, screaming the whole time. Blood filled the room as she took her last breath. When the video ended, it quickly went to another, revealing the same exact room and chair I had seen before. I was traumatized by what I had already seen, and I knew I couldn't watch any more of it. My parents were murderers, and I now know the real reason we moved away 2 years ago. I knew there was something off about that, but I just never could have imagined that this was the horrifying secret that they had been hiding from me. This whole time, I thought Alex was trying to accuse me of being responsible for these murders, but I was wrong. He was trying to warn me. I scanned through more of the videos, each in the exact same room. I was just about finished, ready to go to the police so that I could tell them about what I had just seen, when I noticed something. There was a new video uploaded today on the website. I quickly clicked on it and pressed play to reveal what looked like a man this time, strapped to the chair. He had a sack over his face and I couldn't tell who it was. Once again, however, I saw my parents walk into the frame. My father walked up to the man and pulled the sack off his head. At first, I couldn't tell who it was, but then I realized who I was looking at. It was Alex. So first of all, I only just discovered this subreddit today, which reminded me of something that happened to me in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and family, and I didn't really talk about it back then as it scared the shit out of me, but it was a while ago and is a really well-known creepy story among me and my friends and family. But I think I may as well share it, as it is admittedly terrifying. I was living with my parents and sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time. 2008, which means I was 19. I remember my dad had just gotten Foxtel cable, which is what we use in Australia, but only the TV in the lounge room could use the cable box, and I really wanted to somehow get the cable in my room without paying the extra $100 or whatever for a new box. So, Dad one day went out and bought an AV transmitter/receiver. It was basically a 2-piece bit of hardware where you'd plug this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit a video signal to the receiver connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday, I decided to connect it. This is a picture I took of the setup when I was telling a friend the story. My younger sister, 16 at the time, was the only other person home, upstairs in her room. My room was downstairs. I opened the box and connected it up. At first, I was going back and forth, trying to get the cables right, trying to get the channel right, etc., but no luck. Until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there and something started fuzzing, and this is where things start to feel like a horror movie. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting to see the picture come in clearly. As it started fuzzing in, I remember that this whole time that the cable box wasn't even on, and that's why it wasn't working this whole time. But then why was I getting a signal? It seemed to all hit me at once. As I realized the box was off, the picture fuzzed in and I saw a bed. First picture I took. I freaked the heck out, as at first I thought it was my bed. I had recently seen Saw 2 and remembered that scene where she turns on the TV and it's a camera filming in her apartment. That was the first thing I thought of. I sprinted upstairs to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realized it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose bed it was or how I was getting the signal. Obviously, it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal, but we were just so confused as to who or what it was for. Eventually, my parents came home and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbor or someone living close by for us to be receiving the signal. We waited until around 6 p.m. and then someone came into the room. My dad recognized it as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either this or it was to tape themselves having sex. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room. but just to freak each other out. We'd always make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and it'll just be his face with clown makeup on, staring at the camera waving, and then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened, but what did happen was still super creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days, the novelty kind of wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it and just resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating. Until one day, we turned it on and realized what we had discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. During weekdays, they would be out and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like that for over a month. We started watching the feed and saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for the renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening drawers. I called out to my mom, the only person home at the time, and we started watching it. He started getting the wife's underpants and sniffing them, doing all that creepy shit. But then what happened next was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down the lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mom immediately called Dad. I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then put it back down. I told Mom that I don't think he knew we were watching, but he's definitely the guy who put the camera there. Dad came home, and by this time the plumber had left. Much to Mom's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what we saw. Mom wanted to completely stay out of it and was terrified, understandably. When we told the neighbors, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed Dad to go up to their room, and what he found that was holding the camera was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage, which was completely normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently and there were lots of water restrictions. There still are now, I think. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it in the wall to watch the bed. Immediately, they called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends and showing them pictures, but truthfully, my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy thinking that we could have stuff like that hidden in our house. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mom was speaking to the wife next door and asked what happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out he would, at night, come to our street and sit in his car, which had really tinted windows, and watched them on his laptop. When Mom told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was, besides the obvious of a creepy dude sitting in his car watching people through a hidden camera, because on multiple nights, when I had driven home late with my girlfriends or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon. I don't know if that's what they're called outside of Australia, but it's like a big hatchback car. Always about 30 meters down the street from our house. It was never there during the day, always at night. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming nobody was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was just this creepy plumber sitting back in there on a laptop, watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyway, that's my story. It's all true and still creeps me out to this day, but my friends and I have a good laugh about it. Everybody has a story of someone in their past whom they expect to see on the nightly news. That steroid-infused father who got thrown out of his kid's soccer game. Or the moronic prankster who sent out an anonymous bomb threat just to cut class. That ex who could just never quite give up. For me, it's exponential. Every time I hear a tragedy on the news, whether it be a shooting or a kidnapping or some other horror, a small voice in the back of my head creeps up. From a whisper to a crescendo. What if? What if that guy finally did what he said he would, and I never told anyone? I can't live with that, so now I'm telling you. There aren't any ghouls, ghosts, or goblins in this story. No creatures hiding in your peripherals or illusions of grandeur. This is the story of the truest horror I've experienced my entire life, one that I've kept to myself for far too long. This is the story of the psychopath who ruined my sophomore year of college. I went to a state school in the heart of New Jersey. My life wasn't all that different from your average college experience, I suppose. After a year of living on campus, my friends and I decided to finally break the shackles of dorm life and rent a house off campus. The area and the house itself were sketchy at best. In the first month, we were forced to move out for a couple of days because of an electrical fire in the upstairs apartment. It was fairly common for someone to be mugged late at night, and if you went down a few blocks, shootings were not unheard of either. I rented the house with 5 other guys, and a group of 6 girls lived next door. We had known them from freshman year and managed to rent 2 buildings right next door to one another. The first couple of weeks were amazing. Parties, drinking, debauchery, etc. Sleep was for the day and class was for the dumb. One girl in particular, Alyssa, had always been like a little sister to me. She had dated my friend for a few months and we had become good friends in the process. She was the type of girl that had to try every obscure activity once. What better way to enjoy the college experience than to try everything? StarCraft Club? Check. Classics Club? Dress Up Night? Check. Getting stoned and passing out on the roof? Check. It was her idea to move somewhere nearby, and I was naturally all for it. One day, after a few weeks of living off campus, she came to me with a flyer for an on-campus event. Learn to give the perfect massage. I believe it was called. To be honest, I wasn't one to sacrifice my time for these events. They usually involve forced social interactions that almost always led to nothing, but 20 kids desperately eyeing the clock. However, I hadn't been out all that much, so it was time to meet some new people, and I decided to give it a shot. Alyssa and I got to the class 5 minutes late, and the lecture had begun as we grabbed our seats. Most people in the class were typical guys, anxious for the excuse to obviously grow up girls. A few were shy, awkward freshmen who were just trying to meet new friends. One guy, however, stood out to me. He stood at the back of the room, away from all the mini groups and circles that had formed. He sat on the floor with his legs spread and pulled up to his chest, and he looked straight at the floor with a surly look painted on his stoic face. For a reason that I can't really explain, this guy struck me as different. I don't know why, to be honest. He wasn't any taller than average, no shorter, no thinner, no fatter. His hair wasn't too long or too short. He wore a pair of blue jeans and a plain white shirt, but the way he avoided eye contact with anyone in the room for the entirety of the lecture still gives me chills to this day. After a brief introduction and an hour or so of introduction and lecture, we were randomly paired to begin trying the exercises on one another. I was paired with a chatty girl with long black hair who seemed nice enough. Alyssa, on the other hand, was not so lucky. Now, this part of the story I only know secondhand. I was on the other side of the room and, to be honest, far more interested in my partner than what was going on with Alyssa. When it was time to go, I walked over to her and her partner and said hello. She smiled nervously at me, pretending to be incredibly involved with putting things in her backpack. While her partner glared at me for about 10 seconds, I opened my mouth to introduce myself and he turned and walked away. What was that about? I had asked her, thoroughly baffled. I have no idea, she responded. He didn't say a word the entire time. I tried to talk to him, ask him about school. Not a word. He just said his name was TJ. Can we just go? Thinking little of it, we grabbed our bags and headed home because it was a Friday night. Alyssa and her roommates came over to drink and hang out. To be candid, I don't remember much of that night. So, let's move on to the next morning. Alyssa woke up and had 5 emails, all from different addresses, but with a similar theme. She sent them to me at one point, but I lost them, so I'll have to paraphrase. Email 1. Hello, this is TJ from class. It was really nice to meet you. And the second. Do you know of any parties tonight? I'd love to bring you to one. Here's my number. Number 3. Do you use this email often? The 4th one. Please write back with your number. And email 5. I added you on Facebook. My name there is Joe Simpson. First off, Alyssa never gave him her email. He probably found it on a school mailing list or something along those lines. Regardless, Alyssa responded with a kind yet firm email. She lied and said her boyfriend, one of my roommates, was very protective and didn't want her giving her number out to guys. After that, he didn't respond through email. Second, his name wasn't Joe Simpson. I have no idea why he liked alternate names, but it wasn't the first he tried to add her with. Henry Ford, John Jones. There were at least 20 in the first week. Then it started to get creepier. He would create names that meant something to her. Jim Carrey, her favorite actor, was one. When that didn't work, he tried her favorite author, musician, and athlete. We never know how he learned so much about her. The messages started to get more descriptive as well. He would say things like, your boyfriend is a scumbag. He's cheating on you, and if I can make him leave you, will you see me? Ignoring him only made it worse, though. The messages turned into phone calls after he somehow got her phone number. He would call in the middle of the night, 1 a.m., 2, 3, it didn't matter. Sometimes he wouldn't say a thing at all. He'd just sit in silence as Alyssa yelled into the phone, begging for him to leave her alone. Once he got Alyssa's phone number, he got her boyfriend's. He would call and send text messages telling him he was worthless, that she didn't care about him, that he had hooked up with her. When it got to the point that they were concerned for their safety, they contacted the school. Keep in mind, this was before the school shootings in the United States were a major problem. Back then, schools were not nearly as concerned about what they viewed as an argument among college students, since he had never physically threatened either Alyssa or her boyfriend. There was nothing they could do but bring him in for a talk. That didn't help though. 3 days later, Alyssa got a text message from TJ. It was a couple of words, but it was enough. It was her address. It's funny how just a few words on a small screen can make you fear for your safety and the safety of those around you. She didn't respond. She packed up a bunch of her stuff, called her boyfriend, and asked if she could stay at our place for a little bit. She didn't have any other guy friends in the area, and she didn't have the money for a hotel. Naturally, we told her, of course. What did one guy have against 6 overconfident 19-year-olds? I was out late that night. My roommate stayed at home, while I went out to a nearby bar and had a drink, or 6, with some friends from class. I remember stumbling back down the empty college streets around 2 in the morning. It had just started to snow, and I was underdressed. A thin button-down clung to my skin. I stripped it off as I rounded the corner to my house. I was drunkenly trying to shake the snow off of it when I looked up and saw TJ standing on my front porch. He turned to face me, and I'll never forget the look of determination painted on his face. In one hand, he held a collapsible baton, in the other, the key to our apartment. I stood there in utter disbelief, staring at TJ for what must have been a full minute. He didn't say a word. There was a glassy look in his eyes, one of cold indifference. He looked down at me from the porch like I was a mouse caught in his trap. Finally, I stepped forward. Cautiously, I watched his hand for any sudden movements. As I extended my arm, he spoke. "Hi, my name is Henry Ford. Do you know where 48 High Street is?" He never blinked, never shifted uncomfortably, scratched his head, fidgeted, or anything. When the snow is coming down that hard, you rarely see people that still. They are constantly brushing the frozen flakes from their face, adjusting their sleeves, fixing their gloves, adapting their hair, etc. His gaze was stoic, in control, and ready. I shook my head in disbelief. "TJ, I know who you are. You need to leave now." "I'm looking for 48 High Street. There's a party there," he responded. His serious demeanor, the one I had never seen him turn off, slowly melted from his face. He turned up the corners of his lips to reveal a sickly, painted smile. "Dude, you need to..." In one fluid motion, he reached back with the baton and cracked it across my ribs. The sharp ache was incredible. For anyone who says a baton isn't a serious weapon, you've obviously never been hit with one. At the moment, it felt as though he had shattered my entire ribcage. It was one of the few moments in my life where I've seen stars and nearly blacked out due to the pain. Luckily, I have a feeling the whiskey dulled it enough. I reached back and responded with a right hook to that sick son of a bitch's face. He screamed one of the most unholy noises I've ever heard. I can't even think of the proper comparison to that noise. You're going to laugh, but it sounded like the noise a howler monkey makes when it finds an enemy in its territory. Immediately, barely losing a step, he hopped to his feet and ran off down the street. At this point, my roommates had begun to pour out of my house. They were half asleep, but knew something was wrong. I was kneeling in the street, cursing up a storm as I watched him sprint around the corner. A week later, TJ was kicked out of school. My ribs weren't shattered, only deeply bruised. I was very lucky. I had to wear a thick layer of bandages for a couple of weeks to ensure that nothing did break accidentally. That night, we had phoned the police. My testimony about the flight outside our house did very little, to be honest. Nobody had seen it. My roommates had come outside just after TJ had run off and were left with me shirtless in the street, clutching my purple ribcage. Police officers immediately pointed out the fact that I was intoxicated. How would I know who the hell hit me in my condition? The end result? TJ never got any criminal charges. Luckily, there were other things we could do. Alyssa filed a restraining order and was allowed to return to her house. 2 armed police officers patrolled our block every night for a week at our request. For a while, none of us heard from TJ. Alyssa resumed sleeping at our house once the police patrol was finished, and things slowly began to return to normal. She soon began to become the normal, carefree girl I had known freshman year once again, though she still refused to sleep or walk alone. She no longer nervously checked her email or Facebook every 10 minutes, and she even began to go to the bar some nights. Eventually, even I stopped carrying around the small knife in my boot when I went out at night. We thought he had finally given up. Around 2 months later, I was up late one night watching old episodes of 6 Feet Under on my laptop. You know the routine, don't you? It's always just one more episode. This excuse is the reason for me being up at 3 in the morning. Anyway, I was lamenting the fact that the main actor looked far too much like Joel McHale when my laptop buzzed a happy alert. New message. I opened it up, and this is what I read. By the way, I don't know how these messages aren't still in my inbox. I wanted to post some screenshots, but it doesn't look like they're there anymore. Could this be because he deleted the account? From Frank Ford. Hello, you don't know me. I'm a friend of Alyssa's from bio. I think she got a new number and I need to reach out to her about a study group. This troubled me. First of all, how the hell would this guy know I was Alyssa's friend? Fearing the most, I responded. From Matthew. Sorry man, I can't give out her number. Just get it next time you see her. From Frank Ford. Stupid prick. How about I come over there and make you tell me? You know I'll find it. I nearly threw my computer out of the window. 3 a.m. I did not need to deal with this shit. I didn't grace him with a response. I simply deactivated my Facebook account. I spoke to Alyssa the next day, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. The messages themselves weren't overly threatening at first. Usually, he would just ask how her day had been going. How was that new club she was in? What did she think of the current political climate? What was her biology professor like? Alyssa ignored him entirely. Eventually, he got her new phone number. I have no idea how. At first, he would call her every night. She would never answer, of course, so he would leave a ranting voicemail. The topic of these messages usually varied. Sometimes it would be a ranting political anecdote. Sometimes he'd talk about biology or a recent Jim Carrey movie that came out. Other times, he'd scream at the top of his lungs for her to pick up the phone. Over time, the voicemails and messages began to decrease. She would get one a week, then one every 2, then one a month. As time moved by, Alyssa's attitude towards the situation changed. It became apparent that TJ was no longer something she could eradicate, but rather something she would have to live with. Junior and senior year went by relatively normal. He would still call her here and there, but the nature of the messages was nowhere near as threatening. Sometimes he would say he had the wrong number, and sometimes he would just talk. It was weird. He just sort of faded out. By the time we graduated college, none of us heard from TJ in 6 months. Most of us had changed our numbers a few times and used fake names on our Facebooks. But that had never worked in the past. We thought he was finally seeking help. And maybe he was. Honestly, I don't know. What I do know is the reason that I'm bringing this all up now. The reason why I'm telling you is that I desperately need to get this off my chest for the sake of my own sanity. Last Tuesday night, I got a Facebook message from Henry Ford. The first in years. Did you miss me? Help me find her, or I'll find you. I wish I could give you a concrete ending. The good guy catches the bad guy and throws him in jail for the rest of his life. The bad guy finds the help he needs and mends fences with those he terrified for the better part of a school year. All's well that ends well, right? The truth is, I don't know where TJ is. I don't know if he's still watching my old apartment or if he knows exactly where I am. He could know where I work, where I sleep, who I'm dating, what I'm writing. Hell, he could be reading this right now for all I know. So I will leave you with the same response I sent to Henry Ford on Tuesday night. This is by far the weirdest experience I ever had. When I was 6 years old, I had a neighborhood friend named Trevor, who was way older than me, like 6 years. I always thought of him like the older brother I never had. My sister was about his age, but she always thought he was weird, so she never hung out with him. In fact, I realized no one in the neighborhood really liked to be around him, but for some reason I did. Maybe it was because I felt bad that he had no friends, or just for the fact that he treated me so nicely. I would always tell him, "You're like the brother I wish I had," and he'd reply, "We're more than that." At first I thought he meant best friends, but it turns out it meant something more. About a year later, my sister and I moved with my mom to my grandparents' home because my parents were struggling with their marriage and needed to take a break. That break lasted for about 2 whole years until my parents finally decided that things were okay between them and we moved back into my old house. When I returned, most of the kids in my neighborhood were gone. But there was one familiar face I recognized, Trevor. I remember being so excited to see him and I ran to hug him, but he placed his hand in front of himself as if to halt me. I stopped and felt confused. I thought maybe he didn't recognize me because I was now 10, much taller and my hair was much longer. I began telling him that it was me and I was back and that I missed him. He looked at me with anger plastered on his face and said something like, "Why did you leave me? I don't know if things could ever be the same again." I tried to explain to him what happened, but he would interrupt me with, "You're a bad liar. I know you ran off with someone else." I was even more confused and promised him I didn't. At the time, I never thought anything weird about it because I was so young and just really wanted my friend back. He wouldn't talk to me for a few days until he finally forgave me. We continued our adventures and played together like old times. But there were some things that did change. Trevor was now a freshman in high school and he would always bring up stuff he learned in his health class, like the male and female anatomy. He'd show me a picture of a penis and vagina that was from his textbook and would teach me about them. I kind of knew what they were, but had no idea what a penis looked like, and no offense, men, but I thought it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen. I would tell him I didn't want to see those pictures anymore, but he kept saying that I needed to learn for later on. Later, he would begin telling me about sexual intercourse and how it was done. I was really annoyed and let him know that by raising my voice at him, he finally stopped schooling me and things went back to normal. Fast forward 2 years, I was 12 years old and now in 6th grade. I felt much more mature and like a woman now that I had hit puberty. I made a lot of new friends, but they were just school friends. I would always come home to see Trevor, who was now 17. I was beginning to notice how strange he was when he kept wanting to play house with me. I didn't want to because I felt too mature to play this game anymore. He would always beg me to play one last time, so I gave in. He asked me if I had started my menstrual cycle yet, and since we knew each other for so long, I was comfortable with him. I told him yes. He would continue to ask me strange questions about if I had pubic hair and what size bra I wore. I would fake laugh it off and tell him that he was too nosy. So we were about to play our usual house when he decided to change things up by pretending that we were a couple about to get married. He made us dress up in formal attire and literally did everything that happens at a wedding. He even had fake rings to go along with it and sealed our marriage with a peck on the cheek. And whenever I tried to take the ring off, he would get mad and tell me that it was a gift and that it would be rude of me to not wear it every day. I kept the ring on around him but would take it off whenever I wasn't. Months went by and I continued to notice how much weirder Trevor was, and I especially noticed how much more sexual he had become. I even asked him to leave my 13th birthday party because of how weird he was acting with my other friends. Plus, he would constantly tell them that I was his wife and we had no rings to prove it. I would tell him that it was our friendship ring, to which he was irritated. Months later, I came home from school and was surprised to discover a bouquet of flowers and a card on top of my dresser. In the card read something like, "Happy anniversary, can't believe it's already been a year. Yours truly, Trevor." I was so annoyed that he still played out the "we are married" fantasy. I was mad at my parents for letting him into my room without my permission too. My parents told me that they never let him into my room. In fact, they never even saw him. I was creeped out. I would try my best to avoid Trevor and tell him that I had a lot of homework. When we did hang out, he would make me feel uncomfortable with his weird comments and always try to make me feel guilty for not getting him an anniversary gift. I got even more creeped out when he would say, "You know, we never really got to finish our wedding yet. We still have our honeymoon." His creepiness got to the point where he would call me in the middle of the night to tell me how much he appreciated me or just to say hello. I ended up ignoring his calls and putting my phone on silent. Once I did that, he would literally show up at my bedroom window and tap on it until I would wake up. My sister would sometimes hear him and would tell him to go away if he didn't want her to call the cops. He stopped coming, or at least I thought he did. I would start to notice things in my room not the way they were before. For example, my bed covers would be messed up when I knew for a fact that I made my bed before I left for school. Decorations in my room would be placed in different locations or would vanish. I blamed my sister for these things, but she swore that it wasn't her. Things got even stranger with Trevor and I no longer enjoyed his presence anymore. But one day, everything changed and I never saw him again. It was like he vanished. One day he was a creep and the next he was gone. I asked my parents if they knew where he had gone and they said he left to go live with his uncle or something in Illinois. I was so relieved to know that he was out of my life. As the years passed and I graduated high school, I never saw Trevor. I would sometimes see his mom outside, but she would never make eye contact with me. In fact, I noticed that she looked kind of nervous when she saw me. I never really knew his mom. She was always in her room when I would go to their house. I could barely ever get a full sentence out of her. Trevor always said that she was super shy. I visited home for a summer after finishing my first year of college. I was extremely happy to be home in my old room, which was basically a guest room now that I was gone. I was going through old stuff of mine my mom had packed into boxes when I noticed the ring that Trevor had given me. I picked it up and showed it to my mom, telling her about the odd time, that Trevor made me marry him, etc., and how weird it was that he left without saying goodbye when he was mad at me for leaving all those years ago. He was a hypocrite, I said. When I mentioned him, the look of concern was apparent on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and that was when she told me the truth about what happened to Trevor. Apparently, while we were all asleep, my father woke up to some noise. He waved it off as my sister or me just using the restroom or something and tried to go back to sleep. Then he began hearing different noises. He said it sounded like somebody was crying. He thought it was one of us having a nightmare and got up to check on us. He goes to check on my sister when he noticed the sound was coming from my bedroom. He was using his cell phone as a light, and when he was close enough to see into my whole room, what he saw shocked and angered him. There, in all of his naked glory, was Trevor staring down at me as I slept. Those weren't cries my dad heard. They were moans from Trevor masturbating. My dad says, "WTF," and begins marching closer to my room, but Trevor hears him and runs out of there. By this time, my mom was awake because she wanted to know what was going on. My dad told her to stay inside while he went to Trevor's house to beat the life out of him. Of course he didn't. His mom begged him not to and said that it wasn't his fault and that he had a mental illness. Apparently, Trevor kept repeating that he and I were married and that he was just trying to consummate our marriage. That really sickened and pissed my dad off. My dad threatened him by saying if he ever saw his face again, that he would kill him. And from that day on, we never saw him again. To this day, I still do not know where he went. Hopefully his mom got him some help because he definitely needed it after what I experienced, and from what my mom told me, it gives me the shivers and it really disturbs me. Okay, so he wasn't my blood uncle, he was my biological aunt's brother-in-law. My mom used to date sketchy guys when I was a teenager. I didn't live with her much because she was a horrible role model, so my grandmother raised me for a big chunk of my life. I'm thankful for that because she taught me so many values and how to be a lady. I later moved in with my dad and stepmom and half-siblings when I was 15 and had a wonderful life with them. When I was 14, I lived with my mother and her skeezy boyfriend, Dale, for a year in the upper half of a duplex. Her boyfriend had this friend that would come over very occasionally that looked just like the white guy from the Jerky Boys. Same hair too, and he creeped me out because he would always stare at me and I would always catch him creepily staring at my ass and breasts. My aunt lived down the block that I would visit quite frequently because she was the cool aunt. She was in her 20s, super fun and really pretty, and she had a 1969 Firebird convertible that we would drive around in and blast Aerosmith. This was the 90s. So, with that said, I saw her brother-in-law Jeff quite a bit because he was renting out her basement. I thought he was kind of weird but an okay guy. So one night, at about 11:30 or midnight, I was home alone and I got a knock on the door. Our door had a square glass panel towards the top that was painted over with a little peephole scratched in the paint. I look through and it's my aunt's brother-in-law Jeff. I open the door and I'm like, "Oh, hey, what's up?" He asks me if my mom or Dale, mom's boyfriend, is home. I said no. Mom was at work, and who knows where Dale is. Then he asked me to come downstairs because he wanted to talk to me. I trusted him because I considered him family, and I was also pretty timid, and I didn't like saying no to people. So I follow him downstairs to the front porch, see his car parked, and still running on the street with the headlights on, and sitting in the passenger seat with the window rolled down, was the jerky boy looking dude that hung out with my mom's boyfriend. I paused, and I was like, And Jeff was like, "Hey, we want to talk to you. I want to ask you something." And he started to gently guide me to the car. My adrenaline started pumping and I all of a sudden felt that something wasn't right. I stopped and pulled back a little and tried my best to not look scared. Jeff kept talking sweetly, running his finger up my shoulder to fix my spaghetti strap and saying, "It's okay, just come closer to me." And I pulled away politely and said it was okay, that he could ask me right here. He kept sweetly trying to convince me to just come to the car so we could talk and said that if I was so scared, I could just stand in front of the headlights. The second he said that, stand in front of the headlights, my stomach did a leap and my whole body started to feel electrically charged because I knew if I were to stand in front of the headlights, I would not be able to see and it would distract me, thus making it easy for one of them to grab me. I knew right at that moment I was in a very dangerous situation, so I started acting ditzy and dumb because I was afraid that if they thought that I was thinking they were trying to do something that would land them in prison, he would just grab me right there and cover my mouth and drag me to the car so I couldn't tell on him. So I started to playfully joke around and said that I wasn't wearing shoes and I didn't want to step in dog poop. Then I saw Jerky Boy start to come out of his car and then I just sprinted into the house so fast and ran up the stairs and locked the door. I was shaking so bad. Then the jerky boy looking dude knocks on the door like a minute later, and he's looking through the makeshift peephole. He starts saying that he needs to talk to my mom's boyfriend. I say that he wasn't home, so he goes away from the door, but I didn't hear him go down the stairs. Then 30 seconds later, Jeff comes up and knocks and is talking through the door, saying that he needed to talk to my mom's boyfriend, and he tries to open the door, but it's locked. I said that he wasn't home again. So Jeff starts saying things like, "I'm so sorry we scared you, honey. We just wanted to talk to you and ask you about your mom and Dell," and other bullshit excuses. I was scared that they were going to try and kick the door in, so I decided that I was going to try and sneak out the back. I walked towards the back door, and thankfully I looked out the back window first because I saw Jerky Boy standing downstairs at the back door. So Jeff was at the front door sweet-talking me, and his friend was waiting by the back door. I know what you are probably thinking right now reading this. Call the cops, call the cops. I don't know why I didn't. I think it was because I was so naive and timid, and this guy was my uncle. I was also questioning myself and my judgment because Jeff kept reassuring me at the front door. So I go to the front door, and Jeff is still there talking to me and telling me that he felt bad for scaring me. And I tell him through the door, trying my best to disguise any hint of fear that it was okay, and that I was sorry I got spooked, and that it wasn't his fault. And I just tried my best to placate him and convince him that I believed him. They eventually left, and once the coast was clear, I snuck out and ran to my friend's house next door. I didn't tell them anything, just said that I was scared and wanted to stay there until my mom came home. I did tell my mom though, but nothing really happened, and I thankfully moved to my dad's house 45 miles away 3 months later. I never saw him again. Edit. When I looked back at it years after it happened, I realized that not only were they most likely going to assault me, they were also most likely going to kill me and dispose of my body to make sure they never got caught. That realization made me sick. So I-23 female was at the gym just doing cardio on a treadmill. It was pretty empty. There were not very many people there on a Thursday at noon. I always use the treadmills in front of the mirror so I can pay attention to my surroundings. I was on a treadmill 2 away from the ends, and all of them were empty, save one at the opposite end of where I was. This man gets on the treadmill right next to me, which is weird, but okay. I have my headphones in, and I'm watching Criminal Minds, and every so often, I look up at the mirrors just to check my surroundings. And every time I look up, this man is staring at me. Around 37 minutes of my 45-minute planned cardio, he drops his phone off the side of this treadmill closest to me. I was watching in the mirror, and he basically threw it down next to me. He gets off the treadmill, picks his phone up, and then he taps me on the shoulder. Now, I never took out my headphones, so I couldn't really hear what he was saying. He introduced himself. I never caught his name, and then he asked me my name. I gave a fake one. He then said something else, but I couldn't hear him because Derek Morgan got in a shootout. I just nodded and returned to my show, clearly uninterested in whatever it was he had to say. At this point, I only had like 5 minutes left, and every time I looked in the mirror, he was staring at me. I finished my workout and went to the stretching area that is near the treadmills, still in front of the mirrors. I also took a glance at how long he'd been on the treadmill, and it was something like 8 minutes, so not actually long enough to be a real workout, or honestly, even a warm-up. When I moved to the stretching area, he moved to the closest machine and was still staring at me. Using the mirror, I started counting his sets and reps, so in the middle of his next set, I got up and left, thinking this would give me enough time to get to my car and leave, before he even noticed I was gone. I got to my car, sat down, turned it on, and grabbed my seatbelt, and as I was about to click it into place, my passenger side door opened. I yelled, "Don't frickin' touch my car," and pulled out of the parking spot with both doors wide open. I always back into parking spots because I saw something online from police saying that it was the safest thing to do, and I'm constantly worried about my safety. I drove a mile down the road with my passenger side door open. Then, the next day, I went to the gym to report him, but like I said, I never got his name, and the gym didn't want to look at the cameras with me there, and said that once they figured out who it was, they would talk to him, which really didn't feel like they were doing anything about the situation, so the next week I canceled my membership and I've never been back. I met a guy this weekend. We were at the same restaurant. He was with a wedding party and I was with family, not connected to the wedding or couple in any way, Just happened to be at the same restaurant where the wedding reception was being hosted. He was polite and respectful and offered me his number. I took it and decided to text him. We texted for a day or so and then made arrangements to get together for coffee. We got together in the middle of the day at a public place. I drove myself. I texted a friend and told her where I'd be and the guy's name. I figured I was being overly cautious. The first 3/4 of the conversation was normal enough. We talked about work, schooling, basketball, etc. It turned out he was a lot younger than I thought he was. He's 22, I'm 35. He went from kind of shy and very respectful to telling me a story about how the night after the wedding, he came home and people were being crazy. I asked him what he meant, and then he elaborated to tell me he had walked into his bedroom and lesbian girls I know were having sex on my bed. But he was a gentleman and didn't stick around to watch. And then locked eyes and asked, "Have you ever been in that kind of situation before?" I said, "Well, I've lived in apartments, so I've heard people sometimes," and he pushed further and asked, "No, but have you ever walked in on something like that?" I said, "No, that's a weird story to tell someone you just met," and changed the subject. He talked about himself a lot. He did ask me questions, but would interrupt me when I tried to answer and continued to talk about himself. Something felt odd. He was not acting like he was the night I met him. He leaned in over the table a lot and made a noticeable effort to lock eyes with me. I like eye contact, but it felt more like a stare down after a while. I could feel myself moving away the further he leaned in. He started to talk about how he used to pick up girls, but doesn't do that anymore because he realized that the girl he picked up at the bars were probably whores who went there every weekend. Then he wanted to know if I drank, smoked, or did drugs. Did I ever party? Where did I party? Where did I like to go out to? Did I see other men, etc.? Almost no pauses, one question after the other. We talked for a few minutes more and he looked at his phone and said, "The game I want to watch is going to start soon. Do you want to get out of here?" Turns out there was a basketball game on and he wanted me to come back to his place to watch it. I said, "No thanks, we just met, so I'm not comfortable with that, but maybe we can talk again soon." His face sort of changed and he said, "I'm sorry, but I really thought you were going to come back with me." I told him I wasn't sure how he got that impression. I had not at any point said that I would do that. He kept asking me to come back to his place and I kept saying no. He kept asking me why not. And then I kept saying, "I just met you and I'm not really comfortable going back to your house." He said, "Fine, let's go to the park then." Red flags and alarm bells were going off, so I said no thanks, not interested. He basically begged and said that he'd even skip the game if I wanted him to. I said no, just go home. We just met for coffee and it's not a big deal if we can't take it further today. He then asked me to take a walk in the field behind the coffee shop, looked at the ground and literally said, "I'll do anything you want, just don't leave." I said again, I wasn't going to go anywhere else with him that day. Please just respect that and we'll talk later. I got into my car and as he was pulling away, he yelled at his car window at me. "I'm going to do everything I can to change your mind. Come over." I sat and watched him leave because things felt weird. I drove home and my phone was blowing up the whole time. He was texting and calling. He said he was home and I should come over. Then he sent me a video of himself watching basketball on his couch alone. He started sending me messages saying that he could see a future with me, that I was the most beautiful woman he's ever met, that it was horrible for such a beautiful woman to be single, and that he liked our chances to be together. The entire coffee date was 40 minutes maximum. He continues to ask me to come over. I said I was happy to meet him for coffee, but I had told him I wasn't going to come before I left and was not going to go back on what I said. Then the calls really started. 7:55, 8 o'clock, 8:02, 8:07, 8:11. He called and called over and over for the next several hours. I texted him after the first couple of calls. He had sent me yet another text saying how beautiful and perfect I was and that he wanted to date and travel together. And all I could think to say was, "I'm sorry, I don't feel the same way about you that you seem to feel about me. I wish you well. Take care." He said he didn't understand. Did that mean I don't want to see him again? So I replied with, "I'm sorry for not being clearer. No, I don't want to see you again. I wish you well. Goodbye." The calls and texts kept coming. I told him one time to please stop. I had to turn off my phone, it was vibrating so much. The texts were all about, "What did I do wrong? Why won't you tell me so I can fix it and make this work between us? I am a really great guy and I like you so much. You owe it to me to tell me. If you tell me, then I'll stop bothering you, but you have to tell me." I blocked his number, but my phone still logs call attempts from blocked numbers, so I could see he was still calling all night up until 2 a.m. He called a few more times this morning and again this afternoon. I called my phone company this morning to check, and it turns out he had sent me over 200 text messages in that one day. That was the tipping point, and I decided to go over to the police station and at least talk to them and possibly report it as suspicious behavior or harassment. All I had was his first name, which I'm pretty sure was a nickname, and a phone number. The cops were really nice and took down all the info. He had never threatened me, but I had told him to stop and he wouldn't. They said that was enough to be concerned. I showed them the text and the timing of his calls, and they said it definitely looked like obsessive and unstable behavior, and it was good that I came in, even just to put it on record in case things got worse. I felt so bad for even going there, like it was stupid to have even gone to meet him, but I've been on lots of coffee dates and no one has ever done this kind of thing before. After I left the station, I got home and checked my phone, and I had 3 voicemails from unknown numbers, and it was him pleading for me to call him and tell him how to make it right. Doesn't understand why I blocked him. Did he message me too much? Was it a bad move to call me 80 times in a night? Why wouldn't I just talk to him? I recorded the voicemails and sent them in to the police, along with screenshots of the messages and logs from my phone company. Now I'm low-key terrified of what will happen next. Will the cops call him? If they do, will it make him mad? I'm pretty sure I didn't tell him anything about what area of the city I live in or where I work, and all he had was my phone number, no Facebook, WhatsApp, or other social media. I considered changing my cell phone number, but I'm also hoping that he'll get the point after a few days of silence and give up. I'm so shocked I don't even know what to do next. Quick update. He's been texting and calling me from random numbers all day. I've been taking screenshots and sending them into the police with my report number. It's been a long, exhausting day. I really want to change my number, but he keeps sending me stuff, and I feel like it might be helpful to the police to figure out who he actually is. I've informed my family, friends, employer, cell phone provider, and building caretaker about this crazy pants and given everyone a description. I went out and bought 100 plus decibel alarms for the windows and doors in my apartment and installed them. I'm in Canada, so I can't legally carry mace, but I'm looking at alternatives. Mega update. Today he wrote me a really long-winded message asking for another chance and begging forgiveness. He said, I was just overly excited to meet such a beautiful and well-endowed woman, and that he needed just one chance to show you my true worth, pleading and pleading for me to reply and come meet him, and he signed his name at the bottom. I had heard it slightly wrong and didn't have the right spelling on my phone. I went on Facebook and found his profile. He has 0 security settings. He's not friends with anyone I know. I copied that link and sent it off to the cops. I am torn between really hoping that they can talk some sense into him and being terrified that if the police confront him, he'll become even crazier. I would have slept easier if I changed my number right away, but I might never have gotten his real name and profile if I had. I doubt the cops will do much until he starts threatening me. Now I'm torn. Do I change it and sleep better at night, or let him keep screaming into the silence while I collect more evidence? Is it worth it? I keep thinking. All he has is my number. Another update. The last contact I had from my coffee date was 4-ish days ago when he called me at 12:56 a.m. on the 24th. He had been texting me from the same number a few days earlier when he sent me the charming message about me being so well endowed, so I'm pretty sure it was him. I am admittedly feeling a little burned out. I'm taking tomorrow off work to try and chill out. This has been a lot to handle along with work and life in general. I haven't really heard from the cops. I have gotten back a couple confirmations that they've added my screen caps and voicemail recordings to the file, but nothing else. He hasn't been threatening me, and his enthusiasm seems to be dying down, so I doubt I'll hear much unless things change. Here's hoping there aren't any reasons for the police to become more involved than just saying, thanks for the info, we've added it to your file. They have his name, pics, and Facebook profile. I've blocked him on Facebook and hidden all my profile pics. I haven't gotten any friend requests on any social media. I'm being cautious when I go out. The alarms are helping. Both magnetic and glass break ones have been installed. At least if this dumb kid managed to figure out where I live and tried to get in, I would hear something and be able to GTFO. I stashed a hammer between my headboard and my mattress. It feels gross every time I get into bed and hear it tap lightly against my wall, but I'm glad it's there. And thanks to everyone for all the concern. I'm safe and things are calming down. He knows how to reach me. I know how to send screen caps to the cops. That's about where our relationship is right now. A man came up to my door, posing as a city employee and wanted to enter my house to fix the air conditioner. I heard my dog bark and found a man knocking on the door. He was wearing a shirt that had the city logo, but his white kidnapper van parked in the driveway had no logo on it. And city employee vehicles always have the logo on them. The city does not fix air conditioners, as it is not a public service, and city employees are always seen in groups of 2. I was foolish enough to open the door when I saw the city logo and stepped outside and closed the door behind me because my dog was barking inside behind the door. The man tried to insist that he had the right place when I told him that he had the wrong address, and when it was clear that I was not going to let him in, he pretended to check his phone and said that it was actually the wrong house number. I can only assume that he wanted to see if there was anything to steal. We don't have much, but after his visit, I did some Googling and found that thieves often just want to take anything that they can get, and don't necessarily target those with the most expensive items, but rather those who have a predictable schedule of not being home. It seems like thieves and scammers are not very smart.